We're all set. Good to see everybody here. Thank you for joining us for another budget press conference. And wanted to, the number of city staff here, thank you for being here, and Alder Furlow's here, and Alder Saban as well. Appreciate you attending today. So there's a lot here, and I'm going to go over a lot of details of the budget. It's complicated. We're happy to answer questions. This is also part, just the beginning of this process, right? Well, actually, it's kind of the middle of this process, right, Michael? Because Michael, the department heads, the coordinators, Michael's team have been working for months and months to pull together this budget, and very grateful for all the work that Michael and your team have done on this. Just big picture, so under the charter, the mayor is required to submit to the Board of Alders the proposed budget on March 1st. And today we are doing that. The budget will be available online if it isn't already, and for the public to review. And now starts the Alders process of reviewing the budget. They will have several public hearings. They will also have workshops with different department heads in the city to give them an opportunity to ask more detailed questions on any of the proposed changes in the budget. And then usually May, approximately May, the Alders will vote to approve the budget with any amendments that they so choose, and then the budget will come into effect. I wanted to just start by putting this in perspective and thinking about the past 3 years and just how far the city has come. You think about the financial challenges that the city faced 3 years ago with underfunded pensions that had been underfunded for decades, over borrowing in the past, which meant that our debt service payments were ballooning, some budget tools that were used to push that debt cost into the future to make it more challenging for today. Lagging revenues, because the city of New Haven has as everyone knows, a very high percentage of nonprofits that are in the city, so it makes it more difficult for us to collect tax revenue. Underfunding of the state's promise to support payment in lieu of taxes, and all on top of a Connecticut tax structure that makes it very difficult for municipalities to raise funds because we're heavily reliant on the property tax. You recall the $66 million gap in the budget that we had one year? It's been a really, really challenging 3 years. But when you think about where we've come, how far we've come, it is quite remarkable. And that work, in part, is our team here, but it is in large part because of the partnership and leadership of our state delegation, of many people on the ground encouraging and pushing Yale University to contribute more to the city, et cetera. Since then, we've significantly increased our contributions to pensions and lowered our investment rate of return from 7.75% to 7.25%. We've done even more in this budget. I'll go over that shortly. We've capped the amount of debt that we issue every 2 years. As you'll recall, we don't have a capital budget that is every year. We do the capital budget every 2 years so that we can save on the cost of processing the bonding. But we have capped that amount to the lowest level in more than a decade so that we can start to bring our debt service payments down. We have submitted honest budgets without budget gimmicks to the Board of Alders and to the community because we're trying to grapple with these long-term challenges. And in some ways, most importantly, we've seen a dramatic increase in revenues. Pilot payments from the state, payment of taxes from the state went in this current fiscal year's budget that we're in right now, not the one that I'm presenting, from $41 million annually to $90 million annually. Yale University's voluntary payment to the city went from $13 million annually to $23 million annually. And we've experienced, as everyone has seen, with cranes in the sky and groundbreakings and ribbon cuttings, an incredible amount of growth in the city. And we're starting to see the fruits of that progress. In fiscal year 2020, we had a $2.1 million surplus. Fiscal year 21, we had a $2.1 million surplus. In fiscal year 22, we had a $16.7 million surplus. So now we have a fund balance of $36.7 million. We need more work to do there to get into what is best practice for a fund balance, but that allows us a rainy day fund for us to persevere when we face future challenges in finances. Fitch has upgraded us from BBB stable to BBB positive, upgraded us again to BBB plus. And given the direction we're heading in, I am optimistic that we will see even more movement by the rating agencies. These are all indications that we are shoring up our finances so that we can hand a budget down, a city down to our children that is, it is financially stable and able to continue to provide the services to our residents and also follow through with our commitment to our retired employees. So this year's budget continues to improve on how city government functions. It builds on the past work to shore up our pensions, reduce our debt, and it expands key service areas in a way that is honest. The total budget is $663 million in general funds. This is a 4.7% increase over last year's budget. I'll remind folks that inflation for this past year is 6.4%. This budget increases by 4.7%. And much of that increase is driven by fixed costs, pension, debt service, utilities, et cetera. The budget continues to improve and build on our fiscal responsibility. It increases our pension contributions by another $2.3 million annually. So this year's budget has approximately $83 million paying into our pension fund. And part of that work has been the reduction of the investment rate of return to a more conservative investment rate of return from 7.25% to 6.9%. And the budget goes beyond the 6.9% and includes an additional amount of money that is going into our pensions. It's capped the debt. I've made a commitment to cap the debt at $60 million for every 2 years, but this goes beyond that, and this year's budget has a $55 million 2-year capital budget. There are no budget gimmicks in it. It importantly works to attract and retain the best and the brightest and bring our salaries more in line with other municipalities. And frankly, New Haven has been behind here. And we've already seen the work done to start to catch up with the teachers union contract that has significantly increased the salaries of our teachers to come in line with other municipalities and to thank the teachers for the work that they are doing. We've seen that with the nurses contract, which has significantly increased salaries as well. Specifically on the contracts in this budget, we have increased the contract reserves because we are negotiating with many of the additional union bargaining units to $4.7 million. And we anticipate progress on those contracts. We're having lots of conversations with the unions whose contracts are currently open to negotiation. It also includes department heads and other executive management position range increases. The salary ranges for executive management, department heads, has not been updated since 2011. And so it increases those salary ranges to address the challenges that we have been seeing with filling these positions. And just as an example, our controller position has been open since mid-2020, and we have not been able to attract a lot of applicants to that position. We have, thanks to the partnership with the Board of Alders, increased the salaries of the HR director position that allowed us to bring someone in. The library director position is open now, and looking at other municipalities, that position is way under what it needs to be to attract a library director. And many of our other positions are not commensurate with larger municipalities and what they pay in the state: Waterbury, Hartford, and Bridgeport. And so in addition to increasing the salary ranges, which allows for the city to provide options for these salaries, I've incorporated in this budget proposed increases to department heads, some deputies as well. This will bring us in line with other municipalities and allow us to retain our employees and attract more employees. It lowers the tax rate from 39.75 to 37.2, a decrease of 6.4%. And I want to talk about that for a sec because, like a lot of things with the budget, this is complicated. So last year, the city did its required revaluation of all properties throughout the city. Every 5 years, the state requires us to do a reval, and we did that reval. And what we saw is, by and large, property values going up throughout the city. Some areas of the city saw a larger increase in property values. Others saw a more moderate increase in property values. And so we lower the mill rate to reduce the financial impact and the potential tax increase on those properties. Last year, the alders, in order to make it easier for folks to transition to this new mill rate, approved a 2-year phase-in. Last year was the first part of that phase-in. This is the second part of that phase-in that will bring property values to what the reval says is their appropriate value should they sell their home or their property. And so we are reducing the mill rate yet again, like we did last year. And this mill rate reduction, our goal here was to make the change by and large the same, the change in the impact and people will see in their real tax dollars, by and large the same as last year. So the tax rate is going down. There are people throughout the city that can expect to see the same type of financial tax change. So many people saw their taxes go up by a commensurate amount this year. And I want to note, because I think there's oftentimes misconceptions about that, while our tax rate is high for some municipalities in Connecticut, our tax rate is lower than Hartford, Waterbury, Bridgeport, Hamden, West Haven, New Britain, New London, to name a few. So, we try as best we can to provide the services to residents while balancing out the impacts that taxes will have on them. This budget invests in public safety. There is a proposal in this budget to increase police positions, both sworn and civilian, by 10 new positions: 1 lieutenant, 3 sergeants, 3 detectives, 1 crime analyst, and 2 animal control officers. This allows for more upward mobility in the police department, for us to have more supervision and provide more opportunities for officers to have more leadership. And it aligns with our goal to increase the number of officers on the force. As folks know, we have a significant number of vacancies, and we'll be working hard to bring in more officers on the front lines, but also because of that, we will need some more leadership in the police department. The 2 animal control officers are intended to address some of the staffing challenges that we have seen in the animal shelter and to ensure that we are providing the most humane environment for animals in the animal shelter. In addition, on the public safety side, we're adding 2 new positions to the 911 call center, PSAP, a communications supervisor, and a 911 operator dispatcher. It invests in parks with 7 proposed new positions: 4 caretaker positions, 1 parks 4-person, 2 new park rangers, and an increase in around $120,000 in seasonal hires. Our parks are an incredible asset for our community, and we have seen in particular throughout the pandemic just how important they are for people's livelihoods, for their mental well-being, for their physical health, for our young people engaging in sports and the benefits that brings. A number of us were at the announcement of the start of work at the Wilbercross Athletic Complex. That's just one example. And we need to ensure that as we improve our parks, we put the resources, the staffing resources behind them to better maintain them. And so the increase in both full-time positions and seasonal positions is important to that. And as folks may know, over the summertime when the parks need a lot more tender loving care, we bring in a lot of seasonal workers to help with that, and that's the intention of increasing the seasonal budget by $120,000. It invests in our libraries and increases funding for some staffing. I'd also note that it does some organizational changes, and there's 2 organizational changes that this budget includes. One is moving the library supervision from the Chief Administrative Office to the Community Services Administration. I want to talk about that for a moment. So Chief Administrative Office, and Regina Rush-Kittle is here, supervises police, fire, engineering, and some other departments. It's the core to the kind of operational work that the city does. Community Services Administration oversees health, homelessness, youth, elderly, et cetera. And we've seen our libraries for many, many years engage with our seniors, engage with our youth, help offer supports for individuals experiencing homelessness. And ultimately, our libraries are providing a great service, not only in the traditional sense, but a community service. And we think that this transition from Chief Administrative Officer to the supervisory of the Community Services Administration acknowledges that and will allow our libraries to better integrate with many of the other services that are provided under Dr. Dalal's leadership. It creates an Office of Policy, Management, and Grants. This is at no additional cost to the taxpayers. It's just a reorganization. The primary functions of this new office are to prepare and review the city budget, guide and monitor performance of departments, oversee the implementation of operational efficiencies, and prepare the multi-year financial plan and monthly financial reports, and guide the city through financial audits. It invests in climate. I made a commitment when 3 years ago I was running for mayor initially to put a percentage of our city budget each year into investments in climate, and this follows through with that commitment, including investments in complete streets, including investments in electrification of buildings, and other resilience measures. It increases the education budget by $8 million. This budget includes an expectation that the state will increase its ECS, education cost share budget, by $3.5 million to the city. And in addition to that 3.5, we are suggesting an increase of $4.5 million in general funds to the education budget, for a total of an $8 million increase to the education budget. It stands by our commitment to supporting individuals experiencing homelessness. The city is the largest contributor of any city in the state to direct supports for individuals experiencing homelessness. This will include $1.4 million in that direct investment. That is not city staff time, that is direct investment in supporting the work that many of our partners are doing to the unhoused in our city. That was a lot. I hope everyone got that down. Next steps here. So today, as I said, March 1st, I'm submitting the budget to the Board of Alders. They will start their hearing process over the next several months. I will also be doing several budget town halls to get into the details here and engage the community, talk about this proposal. Because it's so complicated, I want people to have more of an opportunity to really engage and dig into the details. And as we kind of start to change our kind of situation around COVID, it's much easier for us to have these in-person budget town halls. We've come a long way. We've come a long way. And I'm really grateful to so many people for having brought us to a point where we're actually able to approach this budget in a position of strength. You know, I can tell you this budget was a lot less stressful because we weren't facing a precipice. And in those previous budgets, it's been a really hard time, not only for our staff, but more importantly for the community, seeing the potential cuts and tax increases. We've got more work to do, but we're in a much better position, a position of strength where we can talk about the direction the city wants to head in. Michael, did I miss anything? You sure? I'm sure I missed something, but do folks have any questions?
First, the second half of the phase-in kicking in. So what is the taxable grand list rising to?
Do you have the number off?
What is it?
Yeah, the taxable grand list is at $9 billion right now. So that's about $175 million increase over the first grand list that was submitted last January. So $9 billion is the taxable grand list for this coming budget cycle. Correct.
And then how is the amount of taxes collected changing? I mean, either property taxes or all? And how much more in taxes will the city be collecting?
So the city's going to generate $25.5 million more from going from this phase in, along with the property taxes that came onto the grand list as well. So it's going to be $25.5 million is what's generated in the fiscal year 24 proposed budget.
With the new proposed lower?
With the new proposed mill rate of 37.2. Correct.
How many full-time new staff positions on the general fund are we at?
There are a total of 34 new staff positions. When you look at the budget, which as the mayor mentioned will be online later today, there's 36 positions in that budget, but 2 of them are reimbursed by the Board of Education just because of organizationally where they fall. But to the city budget, it's a net of 34 positions.
And that's
Full-time, correct.
Thank you. About the rate of return for pensions lowering, how does that increase the unfunded liabilities for the?
Sure. So it's hard to get your head around. So what the city has done in the past is had a higher rate of return. So if you think about your own savings, if you put some money aside and you say this money in 30 years is at a 10% rate of return, if I put $100 aside, it's going to be, a certain amount in 30 years. But if you're more realistic and say, well, the reality is I'm not likely to see a 10% return on average over the next 10 years, I might lower that. It means that you have to put not $100 in to reach that same number in 30 years, but you might have to put $120 in, right? Because you're being more conservative about what you're likely to get in interest on your investment over those 30 years. And so in order to reach that commitment, and we're relatively confident through our actuaries about how much the overall long-term liability is going to be, so we need to make sure that we're investing today enough money so that when folks retire, we have enough money in the future to ensure that we can pay those bills. So we've in the past had a much higher investment rate of return because we're thinking, oh, we're going to make a lot of money off of our investments. The reality is that we should be having a lower and more conservative investment rate of return because we're not as likely to make that much money annually on our investments. The state has 6.9% for their pensions for the investment rate of return, and we have slowly worked to reduce that number down. But it means that in this year and in future years, we actually have to put more in our pensions because we're expecting that we're not going to make as much money each year moving forward on our investments.
Does
that make
anyone
sense?
know what the total unfunded pension number moves up to with the lowering?
We can get that. Yep.
We don't have it off the top of our head, but
The controller position, does that now fall into this new proposed Office of Policy and Grant, or what's
No, the Office of Policy Management and Grants is really separating out management and budget from the Department of Finance, which is very common in a lot of other municipalities and at the state of Connecticut. You'll notice they have an Office of Policy and Management, Bridgeport, Hartford. This office, again, focuses in on the financial reporting, 5-year plan, implementation of budgets. It's really taking the functions of management and budget out of the Department of Finance and allowing finance to really focus in on the operations side. So the controller will still oversee finance. The Office of Policy Management and Grants is overseen by the budget director.
So total, the budget's increased to $30 million, is that right? From 633, the general fund from 633 to 663? That's the...
Lenny's saying yes, because he wrote the release on it.
Yes, 29.5 million, so yeah, approximately $30 million.
Other questions before we go back to Tom?
Let's talk about services. Based on what you're doing in this budget, how are the parks going to be different? How are the schools going to be different? How are the libraries going to be different? I think a couple of years ago, there were increases in the library budget that were designed to increase hours, and that hasn't happened.
Right.
Let's talk about the effect of this from the standpoint of people who live here and do business here. What's going to be better? What's going to be different?
Sure. I mean, the overall goal is that the city's operations function better and we deliver better services to people. And when you think about public safety, the new positions, there's a good number of new leadership positions, and this allows us to ensure that there's enough structure to support our officers on the street and allow upper mobility within the department, but also expand the diversity of the department as well, because if there are more detective, lieutenant, sergeant positions, there are more opportunities for people to move up in the department. And as folks know, when there's a sergeant, when there's a lieutenant, those individuals have more responsibility for directly engaging with the community. They often go to community management team meetings. They're more directly interacting with the community and helping ensure that the police department has that community policing relationship. So that's one benefit. Animal shelter, 2 more officers there, 2 more animal control officers there, will ensure that we have the resources to help support the significant influx that we have seen in animals in the shelter. And I think that that's important as we go through renovation of the shelter. And just on that specific issue, we've had great volunteers that come in very regularly to the shelter, a lot of volunteers, but for specific situations, volunteers are not appropriate. And so we need some individuals with the appropriate, on staff, appropriate experience, more individuals to ensure that they're supporting the shelter. For example, if there's animals that come in that may potentially be dangerous, we can't have a volunteer working on that. For parks, our parks, we have so many parks throughout the city. And frankly, it's a challenge to maintain them all. And having more caretakers to respond to things that are broken, to fix the trails, to ensure that the trash is cleaned up, to support volunteer groups that help partner with the city, is going to be really vital to us maintaining the parks as we invest more in them. As you'll recall, we put a significant amount of ARPA funds into improving the infrastructure in our parks. We need to make sure that we follow through with the maintenance of that infrastructure in the future. Education, one of the biggest cost drivers of the increase to the Board of Ed's education budget is the teacher salaries that we're going to see. And the Board of Ed unanimously voted to support that contract because we felt like, given the challenges our teachers have faced, given that they are not paid a commensurate amount compared to a good number of other municipalities, given the fact that we're facing, like many municipalities, a teacher shortage, it's important for us to help attract, retain them. I would anticipate the vacancies of teachers to start to go down as we invest more in our teachers. Did I miss a category there? There's libraries. So I hear frequently from the community just how important the libraries are and how people would like the libraries to be open more. And I put forward a proposal to increase library hours and put some funding in coordination with John Jessen in last year's budget. We've had conversations with the union and we'll continue to have conversations on this goal. We've increased some of the funding for overtime, part-time staff, and I'm not going to put you on the spot, but if you want to ask that, you can ask Michael later the exact numbers of that, because I don't have it off the top of my head. But with the long-term goal of getting to the point where we can offer Sunday hours, we want to work with our employees. We want to ensure that they're excited about opening the libraries up on Sundays. And we're going to collaborate with the unions and library board to make sure that we can reach that goal. Yep.
What is the city librarian's salary going up to? Do you have that?
So it's 145. Our proposal is 145.
And what is it now? 110. And so for that 29.5 million proposed increase to the total general fund, could you take through one more time some of the top drivers of that increase? I heard 4.5 increase for education in the general fund, 2 something for pension. But what else is filling out that 29.5?
So we have just various fixed costs. So for example, our liability insurance, another 1.5 million. Debt service is going up by 3.8 million on the fixed costs. Again, as the mayor mentioned, education. We do have police overtime is going up by $1 million. Fire overtime is going up by 900,000. So there are just various fixed costs that kind of make up that 29.5 million, but a lot of it, approximately 40% of it are the fixed costs that I just mentioned, such as utilities going up by about another 600,000 approximately, so.
Tom, pilot also slightly went down. So pilot's based on the previous year's mill rate. And because of the revaluation, we reduced our mill rate, and so the number slightly went down. I can't remember exactly. Last year it was 91.4, this year is 90 million. On the other side, we anticipate the Yale payment going up. Yale payment is, there's a number of different kind of calculations that incorporate the Yale payment overall contribution to the city. One is fire service payments. That's based on the size of the fire budget. And so as the fire budget increases, that payment goes up. There's another portion of it that's based on CPI. And so last year's budget, it was budgeted for 23 million. This year, we're budgeting 24.1 million.
And lastly, what do you see the people who are concerned about taxes likely going up for them, especially given all of the money the city's got from ARPA and Yale from the state?
All right, so we work very, very hard to balance what I hear across the city of people wanting more services. And a lot of that is what we've talked about today, whether it is public safety, whether it is more speed humps, whether it is ensuring that there's adequate support for individuals that are unhoused. It runs the gamut. People are demanding more services from the city, and we want to deliver on that. At the same time, we want to make sure that we're not putting an undue burden on people by significantly increasing taxes. And it is not easy to strike that balance. And everyone can come to a different opinion on what the right balance is. I think very, very reasonable people can come to very, very different opinions on what that balance is. ARPA funds are long-term investments, or I'm sorry, we only have ARPA funds for 5 years to use. And we have focused on using those funds in a way that doesn't create a lot of long-term general fund liabilities for the city. In particular, we haven't used the ARPA funds to dramatically increase staffing in the city, because I don't want to run into a situation in 3 years when these funds run out where we potentially have to either lay off a lot of new employees or raise taxes even more. And so we've focused ARPA funds on investments, whether that is capital investments in the parks, whether it is investing in opportunities for community members to purchase houses, to have support on their rents. And so we have also used ARPA funds to decrease the amount of debt that we're issuing this year. Part of that decrease from 60 to 55 is using ARPA funds for some of those capital improvements. And we can go into those details at some point if you want. Our goal with the ARPA funds is to ensure that in the long term, we work to ensure that there's not a significant future tax increase, because the cost of the city budget will go up if we don't invest in certain things now. But it's a balance. And I think we've struck the right balance here. But I also acknowledge that it's a struggle for people, and I acknowledge that.
I have a two-part question. I think the first is probably for Michael, but when you talk about raising salaries at the library, not just for the city librarian position, but across the board, we know several people left in administration because they could be making 20, 30,000 elsewhere. What does that look like for several of the positions in administration and then just in library staffing?
Well, so I just before Michael answers that question, I just want to clarify. So contractual reserves is the funding that we've put aside as we work through union negotiations. So it's an anticipation that we'll finalize some of those union negotiations. There may be some retroactive salary increases, and that is an ongoing process. Library employees, by and large, are 3144 and 884 unions. And so and those two unions are also across the city and many other departments. So as we work through those, I think everyone can anticipate some percentage salary increase, but we're still talking with both of those unions to determine what the overall negotiations where they will land. Separately, the executive management is outside of the union negotiations, and that's primarily department heads. And those, depending on the department head, have different increases proposed in this budget. And we worked hard to determine what the right proposed changes should be by not only looking at other municipalities and trying to come more in line with what keeps us competitive to retain or attract. Library position is a great example because many other municipalities pay a lot more for the library directors, and frankly, some of them with much, much smaller systems than we have. Controller is another example of that. And so there's one component is comparing to other municipalities. The other component is pay equity and making sure that if we increase one person's salaries, we have to be fair to other people that may be managing approximately the same number of people, that may be within the city, that may be having a similar job, and making sure that not the actual day-to-day functions, but the management and responsibility, making sure there's pay equity across the system. That didn't quite answer your question.
No, it did. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And the other question is for Dr. Dalal. I know we're at the beginning of this process, but can you talk a little bit about the sort of more thorough integration of social services into the work that the library is already doing?
Yeah, sure. I think the proposal to realign libraries into the Community Services Administration, I think is a very important opportunity to think about those possibilities. There are actually already substantial ongoing collaborations between the current CSA departments and the library. One example comes to mind is social work in libraries, where there's a part-time social worker provided to the main library. There are other ongoing collaborations where we train library staff. So I think really this is an opportunity to plan, coordinate as department heads together to identify those add-on opportunities that will benefit the residents overall. I can say from the current departments that we have, elderly services, youth services, there's tremendous reach and tremendous opportunity for the library to reach even more people, utilizing those networks and thinking creatively about how those services can be made more convenient and accessible for individuals.
Thank you.
Are we good? All right. Thank you, everybody. We will talk offline.